Simon & Schuster Audio presents The Anti-Communist Manifesto by Jesse Kelly with Nick Rizzuto. Read by Jesse Kelly.
Dedicated to me. Forward. I'm always talking about how evil communism is. One day someone said to me, "Hey, you should write a book about it." So here it is. Jesse Kelly. Introduction. Communism is an evil, demonic religion, and it has infected America to its bones. It will tear this nation apart if it is not driven from our shores. America is on the verge of defeat, brothers and sisters. As a nation, she is unrecognizable from what she was a century ago, what she was a decade ago, a year ago, yesterday. The ideals, principles, and foundations that once made her the envy of the free world have been eroded to the point of non-existence. All that remains is for a gentle push to send her over the edge. Picture in your mind a person who has damaging information against the Clintons and is teetering on the edge of a cliff with Hillary in a three-point stance behind them. That's America right now. I wish I could tell you that our nation stands at a crossroad, that things could go either way and the future of the country is up in the air. But that's not the case. America chose a path long ago. Now we stand within sight of the journey's dark end. You no doubt see it every day on your television screens, in the news you read, in the entertainment you consume, in the incessant jabbering of the wildebeests on The View, in the syllabus your son or daughter brings home from school. You can practically taste it in the air around you, a bitter cocktail of divisiveness, self-hatred, perpetual victimhood, and degeneracy. All the while, there has been someone leading the way. For generations, he's been guiding us. Sometimes he operates in the shadows, while at others he works in the open. He seduces us, gently taking our hands and whispering in our ears stories of a better tomorrow. He threatens us, shouting about the end of the world and warning of impending doom if we stray from the path. Worst of all, he deceives us, clouding our judgment with lies and making false promises he never intends to keep. He is the communist. But Jesse, I already hear you asking, are our political enemies really communists, or are you just being dramatic? I assure you that I'm not being dramatic. The enemy we face are really communists, and, as I will demonstrate, they are just as devoted to this dangerous religion as their forebears in the Soviet Union or their contemporaries in the People's Republic of China. So where is he leading us, and how will America's journey finally end if we allow the communists to remain our guide? Well, Let me answer that question with a few uncomfortable questions of my own. Would you line up your husband or wife against the wall and shoot them? Would you shove the bodies of your parents into an unmarked mass grave? Would you sit down with your family and decide which one of you must be killed and eaten so the rest may survive? Probably not. I hope not. If you would, perhaps consider putting this book down and seeking some professional help. But if you're anything like me, the very thought of doing any of those things horrifies you. Maybe the suggestion has already caused you to chuck this book across the room. But as unthinkable as all that might be, you'd better listen to my warning, because what I'm about to tell you is true. The communist would do all those things. Time and again, he has done all those things, and worse. Worse still, he has no misgivings about making you do them. The communist is the height of evil. He is walking death. I know this because I understand history. I understand what he is capable of, and as we speak, he is all around us. I'm hoping to pass on that understanding to you in the chapters ahead. I want you to understand why the communist is evil, how history demonstrates his depravity beyond the shadow of a doubt, and how he is currently operating in our midst. People ask me all the time if they should be afraid. The answer to that question is yes. You should be very afraid. However, you should know that there is hope. We don't have to sit idly by and continue to act as spectators of America's destruction. The communist is not invincible. In the chapters that follow, I will outline not only the challenges we face, but the specific steps you can take to defeat the communist. But we must act, and we must act now. Let us begin. Chapter 1: The Communist and Anti-Communist. Have you ever been to the mountains? You might have seen a curious sight, a boulder somehow shattered in a million pieces. It's a fascinating occurrence. When you lay eyes on it, the first thing that might cross your mind is to wonder what force of nature could possibly have destroyed a boulder so old, large, and strong. The answer to that question is water. Boulders will develop cracks over time, and inevitably rainwater or runoff from melting snow will seep into those cracks. A freeze will come. The water will expand. Ultimately, the force of that frozen water destroys the boulder. So who is the communist? The communist is the water. Your society is the boulder. Societies, over time, will develop cracks, just like the boulder. Little weaknesses that don't appear important at first, but they are everything to the communist. He will find them, fill them, freeze them, and destroy your society unless he is stopped. The communist is not the worker. He is not the aggrieved peasant. He doesn't have a specific label. He is the bitter, envious malcontent in your society. Communism is the religion of the malcontent. The malcontent is drawn to this religion because it promises him power, power to take what isn't his, power to exact vengeance on the neighbor who has what he wants, power to satisfy whatever sadistic desires he feels compelled to carry out. The communist's power comes from his commitment. If you think of the communist as a political ideologue, you are grossly underestimating his devotion, and you will never defeat him. He is a religious zealot. He is as deadly committed to his God as the suicide bomber. So where did this religion come from? Like every religion, it has a prophet and a scripture. Its founding scripture, the Communist Manifesto, was first presented to the masses in 1848 and was authored by Karl Marx and his accomplice, Friedrich Engels, the Moses and Aaron of communism. Over the course of their lifetimes, the pair wrote countless volumes outlining and justifying their faith. A person could spend an entire lifetime studying what they and their successors wrote, but let me summarize the key points for you. Human history is a war between two classes, workers and capitalists. The capitalist class are the oppressors. The working class are their victims. The working class will rise up and destroy the capitalist class and the society they've built, and it will be replaced by a workers' paradise. The outcome is preordained. The workers' victory is inevitable, and it will unfold across every corner of the world. Marx's prophecy speaks to the loser because it sets him above all other people and tells him he will inherit the world. He describes the communist as the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country. This description is ironic if you understand who Marx and Engels were. Two men who never engaged in any work themselves. Karl Marx was a fat and lazy man who spent his days living off the generosity of his parents and wealthy friends. This self-described advanced member of the working class never shed a drop of sweat in his life unless he had to walk a flight of stairs, and the only jobs he ever held were as a journalist and a writer. Even his output as a writer reveals his laziness, as a single book, Das Kapital, took him 30 years to produce. He was also a noted liar, a slob, and a serial adulterer who refused to take responsibility for children he fathered out of wedlock. Marx's life of leisure was bankrolled, most notably, by his collaborator and frequent co-author, Friedrich Engels. Engels was not a member of the working class either, although by all accounts his hygiene was better than Marx's. He was the son of a wealthy factory owner, a dandy who spent his evenings carousing, boozing, and slumming it with working class dimes. In other words, he was the type of man Joseph Stalin would have had introduced to the business end of a pistol without blinking an eye. I could sit here and bore you with the ramblings of a 19th century German philosopher, but who cares about theory anyway? To save some time, I'll just present you with the summary Marx himself provided in the Communist Manifesto. The theory of communists may be summed up in the single sentence: abolition of private property. Let me say that again. Abolition of private property. Tattoo it on your mind. Marvel at its simplicity. This is what motivates the communist. His core belief sits in direct opposition to the principles of liberty, central to which is the right to own property and keep the fruits of your labor. He wants to destroy everything you have. The communist lives to destroy property, destroy his opposition, and destroy the very foundations of society. it's important to understand that communism is not an ideology, but rather, as I've already said, a religion. In many ways, it's the polar opposite of Christianity. It starts in Armageddon and promises to end in the Garden of Eden. Marx and his comrades believed that the overthrow of capitalism was inevitable. They told the faithful that victory had been preordained not by God, as a Christian believes, but by the laws of science. Just as Darwin discovered the law of development of organic nature, Engels said in 1883, so Marx discovered the law of development of human history. The workers' paradise, they argued, was not a matter of if, but of when. This is the end times prophecy that the communist preaches with all the same fervor of a priest telling his congregation about the coming of the kingdom of heaven. So with Marx as his prophet, a deep sense of entitlement in his mind, and with total confidence in his cause, nothing would stand in the communist's way. He believed he was the bringer of utopia and felt absolutely justified using any means necessary. He went forth in history to wreak havoc on the Western world and beyond, and wreak havoc he did. He established secret police, imprisoned dissidents in concentration camps, seized property by force, sent forth death squads, induced mass starvation and non-compliant populations. Wherever his religion took root, death and suffering followed. Instead of the paradise promised, the communists brought hell to earth. We'll examine more of his handiwork later in the book, but let's take a moment here at the top to look at a small sample of the evil the communists brought to his fellow man. Shortly after taking power in 1918, Vladimir Lenin established a system of concentration and labor camps that would become known as the Gulag system. The camps would house not only criminals, but political dissidents and class enemies, a term that would apply to anyone who fell out of favor with the Communist Party. The network of camps eventually became a system of slave labor. At its height, the Gulag system consisted of as many as 30,000 individual camps. The system is estimated to have incarcerated around 18 million people throughout the Soviet Union over the course of several decades. An estimated 1.7 million perished. In 1932, Joseph Stalin targeted the Ukrainian people for their stubborn resistance to Soviet rule and agricultural collectivization. In order to break them, he set unrealistically high grain procurement quotas. When farms inevitably came up short, Stalin issued a decree known as the Law of 5 Stocks of Grain. The rule condemned anyone who took even a handful of grain, which was considered property of the state, to 10 years imprisonment or death. An army of Soviet apparatchiks and secret police descended upon Ukrainian towns and villages. House-to-house searches were conducted. Hidden grain stores were seized. The resulting famine came to be known as the Holodomor, which is Ukrainian for death by hunger. Ukraine's borders were closed off, preventing food from being imported. The people became desperate, with some turning to cannibalism. At its height, as many as 28,000 Ukrainians per day were dying of starvation. Families ate each other, or lay in their beds and watched each other starve to death. The United Nations estimates that deaths attributed to the Holodomor range from anywhere between 7 and 10 million. In 1958, communist dictator Mao Zedong instituted a campaign known as the Great Leap Forward, the Chinese Communist Party's second five-year plan to transform the nation into a workers' paradise. The party outlawed private farming and instituted a policy of mandatory agricultural collectivization. Rural farming communities were reorganized into people's communes. The people were organized into production brigades. It was a total failure. Grain output dropped dramatically throughout China. The resulting famine, widely regarded as the greatest man-made disaster in human history, led to the death of tens of millions of people, with some estimates as high as 45 million. In addition to those who died from starvation, between 2 and 3 million were tortured to death or summarily executed by leaders, often for minor infractions. In one case, when a boy stole a handful of grain in a Hunan village, the local Communist Party boss, Jiang Dechang, forced his father to bury his son alive. In another instance of brutality, a man named Wang Ziyu was reported to the central leadership. One of his ears was chopped off, his legs were tied with iron wire, a 10-kilogram stone was dropped on his back, and then he was branded with a sizzling tool. His crime? Digging up a potato. Still another man, Liu Zheshang, was found guilty of poaching a sweet potato. He was covered in urine, then tongs were used to pry open his mouth, and he was forced to swallow excrement. In April 1975, the army of the Khmer Rouge, a communist movement led by Pol Pot, rolled into the Cambodian capital of Phnom Penh. In its attempt to socially engineer a classless communist society, the regime unleashed 4 years of brutality, commonly referred to as the Cambodian Genocide. The regime abolished civil liberties and political rights. They confiscated private property and banned the use of money. The government established a system of prisons where countless people were tortured and executed. In the most notorious of these prisons, known as S-21, those accused by communists of being traitors were cataloged, tortured until they confessed to non-existent crimes, and murdered. At least 12,000 people met their fate at S-21 under the cruelest of conditions. Between 1975 and 1979, the Khmer Rouge's rule would lead to the death of as many as 2 million Cambodians, or close to 25% of the nation's entire population. Have you heard enough yet? Too bad. I saved the worst for last. Between 1949 and 1951, the Romanian Communist Party, in conjunction with the Soviets, carried out what came to be known as the Pest experiment. In a penal facility located in the Romanian city of Pest, thousands of political prisoners, mostly members of the Orthodox clergy, were subjected to a gruesome re-education program. Christians were made to denounce the faith and shout blasphemies. Their heads were submerged to the point of near drowning in buckets of urine and excrement in a cruel mockery of the rite of baptism. Other prisoners were made to torture one another, often to the point of insanity or death. The assortment of torments to which they were subjected is too vast and repulsive to catalog here. It was in Pest prison that the communists' lust for death and cruelty reached its insane but logical endpoint. Not content to kill their enemies, the communists attempted to destroy their souls. Famed Russian writer and Soviet political prisoner Alexander Solzhenitsyn called the Pest experiment one of the most terrible acts of barbarism in the modern world. As I said, this is just a small sampling of the atrocities the communist has committed in countries where he took power. But even nations where his religion was ultimately rejected were not safe from his cruelty. For example, he murdered thousands of priests in Spain and kidnapped some 30,000 children in Greece and sent them off to foreign lands to be re-educated. All told, Marx's disciples racked up an estimated body count approaching 100 million over the 20th century, according to the Black Book of Communism, Crimes, Terror, Repression. That number continues to climb to this very day.